Welcome to World War II Stories for Sleep. Tonight, there is nothing urgent for you to do. There is nowhere you need to go. There is no task you need to finish. No thought you need to hold tightly in your mind. You can let the day loosen its grip. You can let your shoulders become heavy. You can let your hands rest wherever they are. Let the breath come in softly. Let it leave slowly. There is enough time now, enough darkness, enough quiet, enough distance between you and the noise of the world. Tonight, you do not need to solve anything. You do not need to remember every date. You do not need to hold the whole story. You can simply listen for a while, and if sleep comes before the story ends, that is all right. The story will keep moving softly without asking anything from you. This is not a story of battle. This is not a story of noise or sudden movement. This is not a story told to make the heart race. This is a quiet story from the hidden edges of history, from the long winter hours that are rarely remembered, from the rooms beneath the famous names, from the cellars, the riverbanks, the factory walls, the frozen roads, the watch posts, the letter tables, the abandoned stairwells, and the dim lamps that kept burning when the larger world had gone dark. Tonight, we are going to Stalingrad, to the Volga, to the great river in the east, to the industrial city that became one of the most remembered names of the Second World War. But we will not enter the famous version first, not the version of maps, arrows, speeches, and enormous numbers. We will enter the untold story, the quieter one, the story of men in cellars, of sentries in snow, of radio operators listening to silence, of workers walking home beneath factory smoke, of soldiers writing letters by a lamp that was never quite bright enough, of boots hardened by frost, of black bread wrapped in cloth, of a folded photograph kept inside a coat, of the Volga moving in the dark, slow and wide and ancient, while human history broke itself upon its banks. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted from the long summer of 1942 into February 1943. It grew from Operation Blue, the German summer offensive across the southern Soviet Union. It drew in the German Sixth Army under Friedrich Paulus. It drew in Soviet armies, workers, civilians, factory hands, nurses, boatmen, engineers, signalmen, and boys who became old too quickly. It became a city of stone, smoke, dust, ice, hunger, and endurance. But no one inside Stalingrad was living inside history as it would later be written. They were living inside the long present of hot rooms, cold rooms, slow hours, hard bread, river wind, waiting, listening, breathing, sleeping when they could. And for you listening now, there is no need to carry every detail. You may drift in and out. You may let the words pass over you like snow over stone. The Volga will remain. The steppe will remain. The winter will come slowly, and the story will move at the pace of a low voice in a dark room. Imagine now that the modern room around you begins to fade. The walls soften. The familiar objects grow distant. The small noises around you become less important. The present loosens, and somewhere far away, in another century, another darkness opens. You're not falling into danger. You're only travelling through memory, gently, slowly, safely. The air changes first. It becomes wide and dry. You feel the space of the east. The Russian steppe stretches outward beneath an immense sky. In summer, the grass is pale and dusty. The earth is dry beneath the boot. The wind moves low over open ground. It carries the smell of sun-baked soil, dry grass, horse sweat, engine oil, tobacco, and distant smoke. Above everything is the sky, large enough to make a person feel very small. Blue in the morning, white with heat at noon, violet at evening, black at night, with stars spread across it like frost before frost has come. And beyond the steppe, farther east, the Volga waits, not as a decoration, not as a line on a map. The Volga is a presence, wide, patient, older than the city, older than the war, older than the men who came to it with orders, rifles, engines, and folded letters in their pockets. In summer, the river moves dark and slow beneath the sun. Boats cross it. Barges carry grain, coal, timber, machinery, families, soldiers, sacks, crates, and rumours. Fishermen know its bends. Children know its banks. Women wash clothes near its edge. Workers look toward it after long shifts. At night, it carries moonlight in broken pieces. In winter, It will freeze and darken under ice. But now, at the beginning, the river still breathes in summer air. It murmurs against mud, stone, wood, and reeds. The city stands beside it, Stalingrad. Before it was a legend, it was a city, a Soviet industrial city on the western bank of the Volga. A place of factories, streets, trams, courtyards, stairwells, apartment blocks, public gardens, dust, smoke, oil, bread, and ordinary fatigue. A city that had carried another name before and would carry another name later. But in 1942, it was Stalingrad. Not yet the word spoken in every language with a weight almost too heavy to lift. Not yet the symbol. Not yet the ruin beneath snow. Only a city, a working city, a river city, a place where people woke in the morning and thought first of work, food, children, laundry, repairs, queues, factory whistles, tram schedules, letters from sons and the price of things. A place where spring came to the Volga with mud, thaw, wind, and pale light. A place where summer brought heat, dust, mosquitoes, and the smell of dry grass from the steppe. In the spring of 1942, Stalingrad was not peaceful in the innocent sense. The war had already been moving across the Soviet Union for many months. People knew loss, they knew evacuation. They knew shortages, they knew military trains, they knew wounded men and letters edged with silence. They knew that the front was not a story from far away. But the city itself still had rhythm. It still had work days. It still had factories. It still had children in courtyards. It still had boats on the Volga. It still had tram wires and gardens and public benches. It still had the smell of black bread in the morning. It still had tobacco smoke in doorways. It still had women standing in line with bags over their arms. It still had men carrying lunch tins. It still had boys running too fast down staircases. It still had laundry hanging between windows. It still had factory sirens marking time. The great factories stood like iron cities within the city. The Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, the Red October steelworks, the Barakadi gun factory. Their names would later become part of the battle. But before the battle, they were places of labour, places of heat, noise, metal, sweat, skill, exhaustion, and pride. The tractor factory had once built machines for fields. Large machines for ploughing, hauling, harvesting, and working the earth. Its halls were vast. Its floors carried grease, dust, metal shavings, and the marks of heavy wheels. Its workers knew the weight of tools in the hand. They knew the sound of engines being assembled. They knew the smell of oil warming on metal. They knew the rhythm of shift change. Men and women passed through its gates beneath morning light. Some carried bread wrapped in cloth. Some carried tea in metal cups. Some carried nothing but themselves and the habit of work. Inside, machines turned. Belts moved. Steel was shaped. Tools struck. Voices were raised only because the factory was loud. A person could stand inside one of those halls and feel the body of the city beating. Not romantically, not gently. Factories are not gentle, but steadily. The Red October works brought its own world of heat and steel. There, metal glowed, furnaces breathed, sparks fell and vanished. Workers moved with the careful economy of people who understood that carelessness near hot steel could change a life in 1 second. The air smelled of iron, smoke, sweat, coal, oil, and damp wool. In winter, men would step from the cold into heat so intense it felt unreal. In spring and summer, the heat had no mercy. Yet the work continued, shift after shift, day after day. The Barakadi factory made guns and artillery. Its workshops held machines, long barrels, steel parts, gauges, carts, crates, workbenches, lamplight, and men whose faces were marked by metal dust. The name sounded like a future. Barakadi. Barricades. But before the ruins, before the street fighting, before the broken walls, it was a factory where skilled hands measured, cut, adjusted, lifted, checked, and repeated. That is how a city becomes real. Through repeated work, through small motions done thousands of times. A woman tightening a bolt, a man wiping oil from a tool, a clerk writing numbers in a ledger, a foreman checking a line, a worker drinking tea from a tin cup during a pause, a girl carrying a message across a yard, a boy waiting outside the factory gate for his mother, a whistle calling the next hour into being. Outside the factories, Stalingrad spread along the river. Long, industrial, dusty, alive. The Volga ran beside it like a dark road. Barges moved slowly along the water. Ferries crossed. Boats pushed against the current. At dawn, mist sometimes rose from the river and lay low near the banks. Fishermen stood quietly with their lines. They had the patience of people who knew that water does not hurry because men are impatient. Children came down to the river when they could. They threw stones. They watched boats. They carried jars or pails. They were told to stay back, then came forward again because children have always negotiated with danger before they know its real name. Women stood near the bank with bundles. Old men sat and smoked. Soldiers passed sometimes, already part of the landscape. Trucks moved along the roads. A tram bell rang in the city. The sound was ordinary. Metallic. Thin. Human. Stalingrad had trams. That is worth remembering. Before people spoke of rubble, they rode trams. Before they spoke of cellars, they stood at stops. Before the streets became lines on battle maps, they were ways to work, to school, to the market, to the river, to a friend's apartment, to a public garden, to a factory gate. The tram tracks ran through streets that would later be broken. But in spring 1942, they still shone faintly in the morning. A tram came with a squeal of metal. Doors opened, people stepped on. A woman with a basket, a worker with heavy hands, a child holding a piece of bread, a soldier looking tired, an old man with a newspaper folded under his arm. No one inside the tram was thinking of themselves as part of a future legend. They were thinking of space, of heat, of whether the tram would be late, of whether the bread would last, of whether a letter would come, of whether the day would be bearable. Nothing unusual. That phrase belongs to the beginning. Nothing unusual. A tram in the morning, a factory whistle, smoke above the works, dust in the street, a child running, a woman bargaining, a boat horn on the Volga, a man rolling a cigarette, a dog sleeping in shade, a queue outside a shop. Nothing unusual, not because the times were easy, they were not, but because human beings make ordinary life even inside hard times. They make it from repetition, from bread, from water, from work, from jokes, from small complaints, from the cup passed from one hand to another, from a bench known by habit, from a doorway where someone always stands at noon, from the smell of soup in a stairwell, from the way the river looks at sunset. There was a family in one apartment block near the river, not a famous family, not a family history recorded in books. We may imagine them because every city is made of such families. The mother worked at one of the factory offices. The father had been taken into service earlier in the war and was somewhere west or south, or simply away. The grandmother kept the rooms in order with the fierce discipline of those who understand that order can be a form of courage. There was a boy of 10 and a girl of 6. The boy collected small metal things from the street and pretended they were useful. The girl believed the Volga belonged personally to her because she had seen it every day of her life. Their apartment had 2 rooms, a table near the window, a narrow bed, a stove, a shelf with cups, a drawer that stuck in damp weather, a blackened kettle, a photograph wrapped in cloth, a pair of boots near the door. In the morning, the grandmother cut bread carefully. Not too thick, not too thin. Enough. That word again. Enough bread for the morning, enough tea to warm the hands, enough light through the window, enough time to get to work, enough hope to continue. The boy complained that the slice was smaller than yesterday. The grandmother told him yesterday had a larger appetite and should be ashamed. The girl laughed. The mother did not laugh at first because she was thinking of the day ahead. Then she did, quietly. That too is a city before battle. A grandmother dividing bread, a child complaining, a mother looking at the clock, a kettle making its small sound. The Volga beyond the window wide and patient. At the factory office where the mother worked, paper had its own stubborn life. Receipts, schedules, output reports, requests, lists, names, materials, deliveries, shortages, signatures. The war had made everything urgent, but paper still moved in lines. A pencil, a stamp, an ink pad, a ledger. The office smelled of paper, sweat, dust, cheap tobacco, and the faint metal breath of the factory beyond. Women bent over tables. A man with spectacles read figures twice. Someone argued about missing parts. Someone else said the missing parts were not missing. only delayed by people who did not respect language. They laughed because it was early enough to laugh. Later, perhaps, they would be too tired. For now, the work continued. Outside, beyond the factory wall, carts moved. A lorry coughed. A worker shouted to another. A whistle sounded. The city breathed through its industries. But the Volga breathed more slowly. It had seen empires, barges, fishermen, ice, thaw, hunger, trade, migration, songs, prayers and storms. It had seen men name towns, rename them, march through them, build in them, destroy in them. The river did not argue, it moved. In spring its banks were wet and difficult. In summer the air above it shimmered. In autumn wind would come across it colder. In winter ice would change its face. But in the spring and early summer of 1942 the Volga remained open, dark, broad and alive. Boats crossing, engines low, water against hulls, oars dipping, ropes tightening, men calling from bank to boat, a woman lifting a child from a plank, a soldier stepping carefully with a pack, a sack of flour carried on a shoulder, a crate set down too hard, a gull crying once overhead. Nothing unusual. Across the city the public gardens offered little squares of green, dusty, imperfect, but real. Benches under trees, paths worn by feet, children playing, old women talking, a soldier sitting alone, reading a letter, a young couple walking slowly, not because they had nowhere to go, but because slow walking is sometimes the only privacy available. The trees held summer leaves. The leaves filtered light. The city smelled different there. Less oil, less smoke, more dust, bark, dry grass, and warm earth. Even in a city of factories, people need trees. They need somewhere to look that is not a machine. They need shade. They need a place where children can argue about nothing. A place where the old can sit. A place where a letter can be read twice before returning to a pocket. One soldier in such a garden wore a uniform already faded by sun. He sat with his elbows on his knees and read a letter from his sister. She wrote about a cow, about potatoes, about a neighbour who had fallen off a cart and blamed the cart, about their mother's cough, about whether he had received the socks. The letter had travelled through a world already broken by war, yet it carried a cow, potatoes, a cough, and socks. This is how people survive distance. They send small things across it, not because small things are enough, but because small things are what can be carried. The soldier folded the letter, pressed it flat, placed it inside his tunic, then sat for another minute under the tree. Warm enough, quiet enough, still enough, nothing unusual. But the city was beginning to feel the pressure of the wider war. Even before the front came close, pressure travelled ahead of armies. It arrived as rumours, as new orders, as longer shifts, as shortages, as trains, as troop movements, as refugees, as silence in letters, as faces at stations, as official notices, as men looking east or west before answering simple questions. By late spring 1942, Stalingrad had become more alert. Not panicked, alert. The factories worked harder. The Volga traffic mattered more. The city became a place not only of work, but of military importance. The war drew lines around it long before soldiers reached its streets. In offices, maps were pinned. In workshops, production targets tightened. At the river, loading and unloading continued into later hours. At night, some windows were darker. Some conversations stopped when strangers came close. People listened to radio announcements. They listened to what was said. They listened also to what was not said. Still, mornings came. The tram bell rang. The factories opened. Bread was cut. Children argued. The river moved. Nothing unusual, people told themselves. And perhaps for one more morning, it was true enough. You do not need to remember every factory name. You do not need to hold every street. You may let the words pass gently. Dzerzhinsky, Red October. Barricadi, the Volga, the steppe, factory smoke, black bread, tram rails, dry grass, oil, tobacco, a tin cup, a folded letter, a pair of boots by a door. Enough. The story will keep them for you. In another part of the city, closer to the industrial district, a man named Nikolai Sokolov finished his night shift at the tractor factory. He was 34. His hands were thick from years of work. His shoulders had learned the shape of labour. He did not think of himself as brave. Most people who keep the world running do not use that word. He thought of himself as tired, hungry, behind on sleep, annoyed by a valve that had not behaved properly, concerned about his younger brother at the front, proud of a machine that had finally passed inspection. He stepped from the factory into morning light. The air outside felt cool at first after the heavy heat of the workshop. Then it became warm. He stood with other workers near the gate. No one spoke for a few seconds. Sometimes after a long shift, silence is not emptiness, it is recovery. Then someone lit a cigarette. Someone else coughed. A woman said the tea in the canteen had become an insult to water. Nikolai smiled because it was true. He carried a lunch tin, now empty, and a cloth packet with one remaining piece of bread. He saved it for later because saving was a habit. On his walk home, he passed a wall with posters. He did not stop to read them. He already knew the language of posters: large words, strong faces, forward, work, victory, duty, history. He respected duty. He had no energy for large words after night shift. The small words mattered more: bread, sleep, brother, home, river. He turned down a street where the tram tracks curved. A tram passed slowly, sparks flickering faintly above. Inside, people stood shoulder to shoulder. A child pressed a hand to the window. Nikolai lifted 2 fingers in a tired greeting. The child did not wave back, only stared. Children stare at workers the way they stare at machines, with curiosity and a little suspicion. Nikolai walked on. At home, his wife would be waking. His mother would already be awake. His son would pretend to be asleep until asked to carry water. The kettle would be on. The bread would be counted. The day would begin again. Nothing unusual. He waited at a crossing while a truck passed. It left dust in the air. The dust settled on his boots. Soon there would be much more dust from much farther west. But not yet. For now it was city dust. Familiar dust. The kind that could be brushed from trousers with irritation, not fear. At the riverbank, a boatman named Abram moved cargo from a small vessel to the wooden planks near the shore. He had spent half his life on the Volga. He trusted rope more than most men. He trusted weather more than official optimism. He trusted the river least of all and respected it most. His boat smelled of tar, water, fish, rope, damp wood and old tobacco. He had a kettle blackened by years of use. He had a blanket folded under the forward cover. He had a small icon wrapped in cloth, kept not for display but because a man who lives on water keeps things that look back at him. That morning Abram watched the city wake. Factory smoke rose, a tram bell rang, a barge moved upstream. A soldier argued with a dock worker about crates. A woman in a headscarf waited with a bundle. The Volga pushed against the bank, slow, dark, indifferent. Abram spat into the water and told his younger helper to tie the line properly. The helper said it was tied. Abram said that was not the same as properly. Mr. Kealoha in Pearl Harbor would have understood. Harbors teach, rivers teach too, and they charge interest. By mid-morning, the city had become fully awake. Sun on factory roofs, dust above streets, children in courtyards, men on bicycles, women carrying bags. A radio voice coming from an open window, someone sweeping a stairwell. Someone hammering, someone singing 2 lines of a song before stopping, someone calling for water, someone asking whether anyone had seen a missing key, someone saying the key was not missing, only hiding from responsibility. Human beings make jokes because otherwise time becomes too heavy. Stalingrad in that spring before the worst came was heavy enough, but not yet crushed. It stood long along the Volga. It worked. It waited without knowing it was waiting. And far to the west the summer offensive was being prepared. Full Blau, Operation Blue, June 1942. The name belonged to planning rooms, maps, orders, railheads, fuel calculations, marching routes, staff officers, and columns that had not yet reached the eastern horizon. In German units, men checked equipment. They cleaned weapons. They repaired vehicles. They loaded trucks. They wrote letters. They looked at photographs. They drank coffee if they had it. They smoked. They slept where they could. Some had already seen too much war. Some still believed movement meant progress. Some were too tired to believe anything except the next order. In time, the German 6th Army under Friedrich Paulus would move toward the Volga, toward Stalingrad, toward the city that still, for now, smelled of oil, bread, tobacco, river mud, and hot steel. They did not yet know what waited at the end of the long road east, but that belongs to the next part. For now, stay with the city before the road reached it. Stay with the Volga in morning light. Stay with the tram bell. Stay with the factory gates. Stay with the woman cutting black bread carefully at a table. Stay with the worker leaving the tractor factory after night shift. Stay with the nurse checking folded linens. Stay with the boatman tying a rope. Stay with the child who thinks the river belongs to her. Stay with the soldier reading a letter about socks beneath a tree. Stay with the city before it became a legend. The untold story begins there. Not with the famous ruin, not with the final snow, but with ordinary life, warm enough, dusty enough, tired enough, quiet enough, nothing unusual. The Volga moves, the steppe waits, the factories breathe, the sky is wide, and Stalingrad, not yet destroyed, not yet silent, not yet frozen into memory, lives another day beside the river. Far to the west of the Volga, the summer of 1942 opened with heat, dust, and movement. The German name was Vollblau, Operation Blue. It began in June 1942 as the German armies turned toward the south and east, toward the Don, the Caucasus, the oil fields, and the great river that lay beyond the steppe. On maps, the movement could be shown with arrows, clean arrows, straight arrows, blue arrows, red arrows, black arrows, a line moving across paper, a direction, a plan. But no soldier marched inside an arrow. No driver sat inside a line on a map. No horse pulled a wagon through a staff officer's pencil mark. The real advance was slower, heavier, dustier, and more human. It was boots on dry roads, engines coughing in the morning, trucks loaded with fuel cans, ammunition boxes, spare parts, rations, letters, tools, blankets, and men too tired to speak before coffee. It was tank tracks pressing the steppe into hard scars. It was dust clinging to eyelashes, collars, bread, rifle bolts, lips, maps, and photographs. It was the smell of petrol, hot rubber, sweat, tobacco, horse leather, dry grass, metal, and sun-warmed canvas. It was the long summer road east. The German 6th Army, commanded by Friedrich Paulus, moved as part of that immense operation. Paulus was not a loud man in the way later imagination often makes generals loud. He was careful, professional, methodical, a staff officer by training, a man of plans, timings, logistics, orders, and reports. But beneath any command were the men who carried the command forward with their bodies: infantry, drivers, signalmen, mechanics, medics, clerks, cooks, tank crews, artillerymen, men from cities, farms, workshops, offices, ports, villages, and families that had no idea how far east the road would take them. Some had already fought in Poland, some in France, some in the first terrible year of the war in the Soviet Union. Some had winter in their bones from 1941. Some had learned that maps lied by being too clean. Some still believed the road would end in victory. Some no longer thought in such large words. They thought in smaller ones: water, shade, sleep, fuel, bread, mail, boots, next village, next halt, next order. Enough. The steppe gave them distance, more distance than many had ever known. It opened around them hour after hour. Fields, dry gullies, sunburned grass, small villages, lines of poplars near water, dust roads that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere. The sky was enormous. In the morning it could be pale and cool. At noon it became white with heat. By late afternoon the light lowered and the dust turned gold. At night the steppe became black and wide, with stars over the columns and engines cooling in the dark. There were moments when nothing seemed to happen. A march, a halt, a cigarette. A canteen passed from one hand to another, a map unfolded on the hood of a vehicle, a driver lying under a truck with a wrench, a soldier writing home on his knee, a medic washing dust from his hands, a horse lowering its head, a cook stirring something in a pot that smelled more of salt than food. Nothing unusual. That phrase returned even there. Nothing unusual. Only the army moving. Only the road. Only heat. Only dust. Only men doing what men had done for years of war already. Moving when told. Stopping when allowed. Eating when possible. Sleeping when the body finally took what the mind would not give. But this is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one. The long road before the ruined city, the summer before the winter, the men before the cellars, the photographs before the snow. In one infantry company, a young German soldier named Matthias Keller kept a small photograph in his breast pocket. He was 21, from near Würzburg. His father had been a railway worker. His mother wrote letters in a careful hand. His younger sister had sent him the photograph that spring. It showed the family garden. Not well, because the light had been wrong and the camera poor, but enough. A fence, a tree, a corner of the house. His sister standing too close to the lens and laughing. On the back she'd written that the plum tree had survived another year and that he should come home before the fruit was gone. The words were ordinary. That is why he read them so often. He read them in a barn, in a truck, beside a road, in the shade of a vehicle. Once, during a halt, he read them while another man slept with his head on a rolled coat and flies gathered on his sleeves. Matthias did not think of himself as part of Operation Blue. Not in those words. He knew the name, perhaps. He knew they were moving east. He knew the officers had maps. He knew the summer was supposed to bring decision. But the days themselves were not strategy. They were the march, the thirst, the dust, the weight of equipment, the ache behind the knees, the hot rifle sling across the shoulder, the smell of wool and sweat, the taste of warm water in a canteen. He wrote to his sister when he could. "Dear Lotta, the road is very long, and I have decided that dust has ambitions. It wants to become part of everything. It is in the bread, in the shirt, in the ears, in the folds of the photograph, and probably in the thoughts." He stopped there because a man shouted for him to help with a crate. Later he continued, "Do not tell Mother that the water is warm. She will worry about warm water, which is not worth worrying about. Tell her I am eating. This is true if soup can be considered eating. Tell Father the trucks are treated like horses and the horses like machines, which seems unfair to both." He smiled slightly at that, then folded the letter. He did not know when it would leave him. Letters in an army moved according to their own weather. Sometimes they travelled quickly, sometimes they disappeared for weeks, sometimes they arrived after the feeling inside them had changed. Still, men wrote. Writing made home exist for a few minutes. A folded letter was a room, a photograph was a window, a name written carefully was a hand reaching back. You do not need to remember Matthias. He is not in the famous version, he is one of many. Let him pass gently. A man with dust on his sleeves, a photograph in his pocket, a sister waiting for plums. Enough. In another part of the column, a driver named Otto Brandt kept his truck moving with wire, curses and what he called negotiations. He had driven before the war, delivery routes, market roads, rainy mornings, bridges, town streets. Now he drove across the east, carrying supplies that never seemed enough. Fuel cans, ammunition boxes, sacks, replacement parts, sometimes men, sometimes wounded, sometimes nothing but orders and dust. His truck had become less a machine than a difficult animal. It overheated, it rattled, it leaked, it objected to roads, it accepted repairs only when threatened. Otto spoke to it often, not kindly, but consistently. At a halt near a village of low houses and dusty gardens, he lay beneath the truck with a wrench in his hand, looking up into darkness and metal. A young soldier squatted nearby and asked if the engine was bad. Otto said, "All engines are bad, some are temporarily polite." The young soldier considered this. Will it run? It has run before. That is not an answer. It is the only answer machines give. He tightened something. A drop of oil fell on his sleeve. He did not notice. Around him the column waited. A tank crew smoked near their vehicle. 2 horses stood with their heads low. A medic sat on a crate and wrote numbers in a notebook. A cook scraped the bottom of a pot. In a nearby garden, a sunflower leaned toward the road, its head heavy, its yellow dulled by dust. The village had been passed through by war already. Some windows were broken, some doors were open. An old woman stood beside a fence and watched the men without expression. A child hid behind her skirt and looked at the trucks. No one spoke across that distance. What would there have been to say? The army moved on. The village remained behind in dust. The old woman would sweep the threshold later. The child would remember the engines. The sunflower would continue turning toward light. The step would remain. In the Soviet city by the Volga, Stalingrad still worked. The German columns were not yet at the river, but the pressure had grown. Reports came, rumours came faster. The factories increased their effort. The Dzerzhinsky tractor factory worked under instructions that tightened each week. The Red October steelworks continued its furnace heat. The Barricadi factory produced under the sound of machinery and worry. At the river, barges were loaded and unloaded with greater urgency. Trains arrived. Some carried supplies, some carried soldiers, some carried wounded men from other parts of the war, some carried families, bundles, livestock, crates, tools, and silence. Stations are places where history becomes visible before it is explained. People waiting, people leaving, people arriving, people trying not to cry because crying takes strength needed for lifting bags, people holding papers, people holding children, people holding nothing because they had left too fast. At the Stalingrad railway station, the air smelled of coal smoke, hot metal, dust, sweat, bread, and fear held carefully beneath ordinary movement. A mother adjusted her child's scarf though the day was warm. A soldier slept sitting upright against a post. A clerk shouted a name. A woman argued about a missing bag. A man in factory clothes carried a crate with another man he did not know. Two boys ran too close to the tracks and were shouted back. Nothing unusual, or almost nothing. The city was not yet a battlefield, but it had begun to become a place of waiting. No one said it that way. People rarely name waiting while inside it. They say they are working, they are preparing, they are listening, they are following orders, they are checking lists, they are looking for news. But beneath all that, the city waited. The Volga waited differently. The river did not wait. It moved. That was its answer to everything. It carried boats and barges beneath the summer sun. It reflected smoke from the factories. It touched the muddy banks. At night, it darkened and widened. It did not hurry because armies were moving. It had seen armies before. It would see more. In the apartment near the river, the grandmother still cut bread carefully. The boy still claimed his piece was smaller. The girl still watched the Volga from the window. The mother still went to work. But the adults spoke in lower voices now. They listened for news. They saved more. They stood longer in queues. They looked at the sky more often. The boy noticed and did not ask at first. Children know when questions are unwelcome. They learn the temperature of a room without being told. One evening, the mother came home late. Her shoes were white with dust. Her face was tired. The grandmother placed tea in front of her. Not enough tea to fill the cup, enough to warm the hands. The girl climbed into her lap. The mother held her, eyes closed. The boy watched. Outside, a tram bell rang. Inside, no one spoke for a while. Warm enough, dark enough, quiet enough. Nothing unusual if one did not look too closely. You do not need to hold every family. You may drift in and out. A table, a kettle, black bread, dust on shoes, a child at the window, the Volga beyond. Let the details pass slowly. Like river water under evening light. On the German side, the advance continued. The days became a chain of movement. July heat, August dust, roads that broke machines, distances that lengthened supply lines, orders that changed, villages that appeared, were entered, searched, passed, and left behind. A soldier could wake in the morning and not know which place he would sleep in that night. A ditch, a barn, a truck bed, the shadow of a tank, the floor of a schoolhouse, an orchard, a dry field, beside a road. In one column, a chaplain carried a small book wrapped in cloth. In another, a field doctor saved scraps of bandage because supplies always seemed to belong more to tomorrow than today. A radio operator slept with headphones near his hand. A cook wrote recipes in a notebook he no longer had the ingredients to make. A tank commander kept a photograph of his wife beneath a piece of oilcloth. A gunner counted cigarettes. An officer checked his watch too often. A clerk copied names into a list and wondered which of the names would still be present by autumn. They did not yet know the name Stalingrad as a personal fate. It was an objective, a place ahead, a word in orders, a city on the Volga, a line toward the east. They did not yet know what waited at the end of the long road east. The steppe made thoughts simple after enough hours. Walk, drink, stop, move, sleep, wake, listen, breathe. The summer sun made men quiet. Too much heat reduces speech. Even men who liked to talk began saving words. A joke was still possible, a complaint more likely. But long conversations became rare in the hottest hours. Engines became the language. Rumble, cough, idle, roar, stop. The smell of gasoline lay over the road. Dust coated the leaves of the few trees. When columns halted, dust kept moving for a while, as if the army had left a ghost of itself in the air. At night, men washed if water allowed. Often it did not. They wiped faces with cloth, cleaned rifles, checked boots, removed stones from socks, looked at photographs. Wrote brief letters. Dear Mother, I am well. Dear Anna, the weather is hot. Dear Father, we are moving east. Dear Lotta, dust has conquered us all. Short lines, careful lines, lines that did not say fear because fear had no useful destination. The letters moved west if they could. Some arrived, some did not. Some arrived long after the writer had changed. A letter is always a small act of faith in roads. The roads east were long. In August, the German forces came closer to the Don Bend and the approaches to Stalingrad. The city on the Volga became more than a distant name. The summer air itself seemed to tighten. Stalingrad began to receive the war not as rumour, but as a rival. Air raids came before the full urban battle. The city changed in heat, dust, smoke, and fear. But in this sleep story, we do not dwell in the sharpest sounds. We let them stay at the edge. We remember instead the aftermath of sound, the dust settling on windowsills, the glass swept from floors, the smell of smoke in stairwells, the way people returned to a room and found the cup still on the table, the way a worker picked up a tool from where it had fallen and did not know why that small motion made his hands shake, the way the Volga kept moving under a sky that no longer felt innocent. The city's famous battle had not yet become the street-by-street struggle of autumn, but the before was ending. There is always an ending before the known ending, a quieter one. The last normal tram ride, the last meal before evacuation, the last morning when a factory worker thinks mostly of a stubborn valve, the last afternoon when a child believes the river belongs only to her, the last time a street is crossed without remembering danger, the last unremarkable sound of a door closing. Nothing unusual. Then later, the mind returns and understands. That was the last. You do not need to follow every date. Let the facts pass gently. June 1942. Operation Blue, the German 6th Army. Friedrich Paulus. The long roads across the steppe, the Don, the Volga, Stalingrad ahead. A city still working, a river still moving, a summer slowly turning toward ruin. In Stalingrad, Nikolai Sokolov at the tractor factory began working longer hours. He no longer counted them accurately. The factory clock became less a measure of day than a reminder that time continued whether men approved or not. Machines were shifted, production changed. Parts that had once belonged to tractors increasingly belonged to war. The line between civilian and military work thinned until no one could say exactly where it had been. Nikolai's hands remained the same: wrench, cloth, oil, metal, bolt, check, again. But the meaning around the hands changed. At the canteen, the tea grew weaker, the jokes grew shorter. Someone said the factory would outwork the Germans by boring them to death. Someone else said the Germans looked too organised to be bored properly. A woman with a scar across one knuckle said that machines did not care who was coming, only whether the part fit. That ended the conversation, because it was true enough. The factory gave people work. Work gave them shape. When fear came too close, a person could turn to the next bolt, the next measurement, the next load, the next cup, the next step. He waited, he listened, he breathed, he worked, he slept when he could. That is how many lives are carried through history, not by speeches, by next things. At the river, Abram the boatman began making more crossings with military cargo. He did not ask too many questions. The Volga was busy. He saw new faces, soldiers, young officers, men with maps, women with bundles, children being moved, crates marked in ways he could not read from a distance. He saw people look back at the city from the boats. Some looked as if they were leaving forever, some as if they refused to believe they were leaving at all. The river held both. A river does not ask whether a crossing is temporary. It only carries. One evening, Abram stood on his boat and watched the western bank. The factory smoke rose in low bands. The sky was red with sunset, not blood red in the dramatic way, only the red of dust and light. The city made a long, dark shape against it. He heard machinery, a distant horn, voices on the bank, a child crying, a soldier laughing too loudly, a woman calling a name. The Volga moved under his feet, slow, dark, ancient. He muttered that the river would outlast them all. His helper asked what he said. Abram said, "Tie the rope." That was easier. By late August, the city's life had become unstable. Some civilians remained, some were evacuated, some could not leave, some did not want to leave, some waited too long. Factories continued, militia and soldiers organized positions. The 62nd Army, later under Vasily Chukov, would become bound to the city in ways almost impossible to describe without making the words heavy. But that belongs more to the next part. For now, the city was on the edge. The long road had nearly reached it. German units could see smoke and distance and the promise of the river beyond. The Volga, which had been ancient and indifferent, was becoming an objective, a line to reach, a line to cut, a line to defend. For soldiers, rivers can mean maps. For cities, rivers mean life, water, transport, work, food, escape, memory, children on banks, boats at dusk, ice in winter, mist at dawn. The same river can be a strategic line and a childhood landscape. This is one of the quiet tragedies of war. It turns familiar places into objectives. A hill becomes a position, a house becomes a strong point, a factory becomes a fortress, a river becomes a line. But inside those words, ordinary meanings remain. A hill where boys once ran, a house with curtains, a factory with lunch tins, a river with fishermen. The untold story lives there, in the older meanings that do not disappear even when maps rename them. The first soldiers of the German advance who approached Stalingrad after weeks of heat and dust did not see the whole legend at once. They saw smoke, industrial shapes, the river beyond, buildings, roads, a city stretched along the water, a place that seemed, from a distance, like it might be taken and passed through like other places. Matthias Keller saw it from a halt outside the city. Not clearly, only as a smudge of smoke and structure beneath the sky. A man beside him said, "There it is." Another said, "Finally." Matthias did not say anything. He took out the photograph of the garden, looked at it for a few seconds, then put it away. He did not know why. Perhaps because a man looks at home before entering a place that feels too large. Otto Brandt, the driver, checked the truck again. The engine had become less polite. He told it they had come too far for weakness now. The truck, being a truck, gave no answer. Around them, officers moved. Orders passed. Men looked east. The air smelled of dust, petrol, dry grass, sweat and smoke from the city ahead. Summer had not ended, but autumn was waiting behind it. And beyond autumn, though few could imagine it in the heat, winter was already somewhere in the future. Patient, white, immense. Winter had not yet entered the story, but it was coming. It would come over the steppe, over the roads, over the broken city, over helmets, boots, rifles, horses, blankets, letters, roofs, cellars, and the dead quiet between men too tired to speak. Winter was still far away in the heat of late summer, but the steppe knew it. The Volga knew it. The wind perhaps knew it. The men did not. They had dust in their mouths and sweat beneath their collars. They had orders for the next day. That was enough. For now, let the road slow. Let the engines lower. Let the dust settle. Let the city on the horizon remain at the edge of vision. You do not need to carry the whole advance. Only a few images. A truck in dust. A photograph in a pocket. A factory whistle on the Volga. A tram bell fading. A boat crossing dark water. A worker tightening a bolt. A grandmother cutting black bread. A German soldier writing to his sister. A driver speaking to his engine. An old boatman tying a rope. The steppe wide and dry. The Volga dark and slow. Stalingrad waiting without knowing how it waited. The next part of the story will enter the city itself. The cellars, the stairwells, the factories, the ruined rooms, the long silences between sounds, the human closeness of soldiers only meters apart, the 62nd Army under Chuikov holding to the riverbank, the German 6th Army pressing inward, the tractor factory, Red October, Barricadi, Mamayev Kurgan, Pavlov's house, but not yet. For now, it is still the approach, the last stretch of road, the last breath before the city becomes a labyrinth. The evening settles over the steppe, the columns halt, engines tick as they cool. Men sit on crates, helmets, rolled blankets, and dry ground. Someone opens a tin, someone writes a letter, someone cleans a weapon slowly, someone sleeps with his boots still on, someone looks east toward the smoke of Stalingrad. In the city, lamps are lit in rooms that may not have windows for much longer. A mother folds a blanket, a worker washes oil from his hands, a child watches the Volga become black under the evening sky. The factories continue, the river moves, the steppe lies wide between armies and memory. Nothing unusual, someone might still say. But now the words are thinner, less certain. The summer road has nearly ended. The city is near. They did not yet know what waited at the end of the long road east. But the Volga waited. The factories waited. The cellars waited. The winter waited. And Stalingrad, still breathing beside the river, was about to become the long, quiet, terrible centre of the world. By September 1942, Stalingrad no longer felt like a city waiting. It had become a city entered, a city pressed, a city broken open, street by street, wall by wall, room by room, until its ordinary shape became difficult to remember. The Volga still moved beside it. That mattered. The river was still there, dark in the morning, silver under cloud, black at night, wide, slow, and ancient beneath the smoke. But the city above the river had changed. The tram lines were cut. The gardens were torn. The public benches sat under dust. Apartment blocks stood with their windows empty. Factory walls were cracked and blackened. Stairwells opened into rooms without roofs. Courtyards became passages. Cellars became homes, hospitals, command posts, shelters, storerooms, and places where men waited because there was nowhere else to wait. The city that had smelled of oil, bread, tobacco, river mud, and hot steel now smelled of damp brick, candle smoke, gun oil, wet wool, dust, old plaster, metal, black bread, and the particular human smell of many people living too close to one another. The Battle of Stalingrad had entered its urban phase. The German 6th Army, after the long road east, pushed into the city. The Soviet 62nd Army, under Vasily Chuikov, held to the western bank of the Volga with a kind of closeness that made retreat nearly impossible and survival uncertain. Chuikov understood the city's new shape. He knew that distance favoured artillery and aircraft. Closeness could deny distance. So the fighting became close. Too close for the clean arrows of maps. Too close for easy explanation. A street could be crossed and lost. A room could matter. A stairwell could hold a day. A basement could become a world. A factory wall could become a border between two armies. In later accounts, people would speak of the battle in immense numbers. Divisions, armies, tonnage, casualties, operations. But inside the city, the world was often very small. A doorway, a broken stair, a cellar lamp, a tin cup, a folded blanket. A rifle laid across a knee, a boot stiff with dust, a hand feeling along a wall in darkness, a man waiting for the next sound. He waited, he listened, he breathed, he slept when he could. That was how the city was lived, not all at once, only moment by moment. If you're still following the story, you do not need to hold every detail. You may drift in and out. Let the names pass softly. Chuikov, Paulus, the 62nd Army, the 6th Army, the Volga, Dzerzhinsky, Red October, Barricadi, Mamayev Kurgan, Pavlov's house. You do not need to remember every date. You may let the words pass over you like snow over stone, even before the snow has come. The city will hold the details for you. The Volga will hold the silence beneath them. In one cellar near a shattered apartment block, a Soviet soldier named Ivan Morozov sat with his back against a wall and his knees drawn up. He was 26. Before the war, he had repaired machinery in a small town far from the Volga. He had a wife named Anya and a son who had been born after he left home. He knew his son mostly from one photograph. The photograph was already soft at the corners. It showed a sleeping infant wrapped too tightly in cloth, with only a small round face visible. On the back, Anya had written the boy's name, Misha. Ivan had read the name so many times that he no longer needed to look, but he looked anyway, when there was time, when there was enough light, when his hands were steady enough to unfold the paper. In the cellar there was rarely enough light. A A small lamp burned low near a crate. The flame made more shadow than brightness. Men sat around it in coats, scarves, caps, and silence. Some slept sitting up. Some cleaned weapons. Some held cups. Some stared at the wall as if the wall might eventually say something useful. The cellar had once belonged to ordinary life. Perhaps people had kept jars there, potatoes, tools, old furniture, winter supplies. A broken chair no one wanted to throw away. Now it held soldiers, boxes, a map pinned to damp brick, a kettle with a dented side, a torn blanket, a bucket of water half covered with cloth. The cellars smelled of damp brick, candle smoke, gun oil, wet wool, black bread, frozen leather before the full winter, and breath trapped in a room too long. Above them the city shifted and groaned. Dust fell sometimes from the ceiling. A man would look up, then look back down. Nothing unusual. That phrase changed inside Stalingrad. Nothing unusual could mean a wall shaking. Nothing unusual could mean silence after a long noise. Nothing unusual could mean a man asleep while dust fell on his coat. Nothing unusual could mean breakfast made from a hard crust of bread and water. Nothing unusual could mean waiting in darkness with 20 men and not enough room for all of them to stretch their legs. Human beings are strange this way. They can build routine inside almost anything. Ivan held his tin cup with both hands. It was empty. He held it anyway because hands like something to do. Across from him, Sergeant Petrov used a pencil stub to mark a time on a scrap of paper. Petrov had been a schoolteacher before the war. He still corrected grammar when tired. This irritated everyone, then comforted them. A man named Semyon said, "If we survive, I will never enter a cellar again." Petrov said, "You will enter one if there are potatoes." Semyon considered this. "Only for potatoes?" Another man smiled. "Not much. Enough." A smile in a cellar could be very small and still be worth keeping. Ivan took out the photograph of Misha. He did not unfold it fully, only checked that it remained in the inner pocket. Paper, cloth, body warmth, memory. Enough. Above the cellar, the city continued. The ruined streets of Stalingrad had become a geography of fragments. Buildings no longer behaved like buildings. A house might have one room intact, one wall missing, a stair that ended in open air, and a cellar crowded with men who knew every crack by touch. A factory might produce smoke from one end and silence from another. A street might be visible for 10 meters, then vanish into dust, rubble, and the shadow of a broken wall. Men of both armies lived almost on top of one another. Sometimes they were separated by a floor, sometimes by a room, sometimes by a wall, sometimes by nothing more than darkness and the decision not to move. The famous phrase would later be repeated, Rattenkrieg, war of rats. But even that word can become too sharp for tonight. We will not make spectacle of it. We will stay with the quieter truth. Men in holes, men in rooms, men behind walls, men listening, men thirsty, men tired, men writing letters they were not sure would travel, men too close to the enemy and too far from home. On the German side, Matthias Keller had reached the city after the long road. The photograph of the garden remained in his pocket. Dust had entered its folds. He had tried to wipe it away and made it worse. He did not write to Lotta as often now. There was less time, less paper, less calm. Words became harder when the city itself seemed to consume them. He lived in half rooms and shattered corridors. He slept in places that had once been kitchens. He waited in stairwells. He learned to recognize the sound of the loose brick under a boot. He learned that silence had many kinds: safe silence, listening silence, exhausted silence, silence before movement, silence after a sound no one wanted to name. One evening, he sat with 3 other men in what remained of an apartment. A wall had fallen away, leaving the room open to a view of the Volga in the distance. The river looked calm from there, almost impossible, a dark ribbon beyond smoke and ruin. Matthias watched it for a long time. A man beside him, named Ernst, said, "It looks peaceful." Matthias nodded. "Too far away." The river was close on maps, far in the body. Between them and the water lay broken streets, positions, orders, fear, exhaustion, and the invisible thickness of the battle. Ernst had a harmonica but did not play it. No one asked him to. Some objects become too tender to use. A harmonica, a photograph, a letter, a child's drawing, a clean handkerchief. They remain in pockets as proof that another world once existed. You do not need to choose sides inside these small rooms. The story does not ask that of you. History will keep its facts. The moral weight of the war remains what it is. But tonight, we are looking at the human hours inside the city, at men who are tired, hungry, cold, afraid, still alive, still waiting, still breathing. In September, the days grew shorter. The heat of summer remained in dust and stone, but autumn entered the evenings. A cooler wind moved from the river. The Volga began to feel different at night. It carried a chill that slipped through broken windows and open cellars. Men pulled coats closer. They wrapped scarves. They slept with boots on. At first, cold was only discomfort. Later, it would become a ruler. But already winter was practicing. The first cold came as a whisper, a damp sleeve that did not dry, a hand stiff around a cup, a blanket shared because another man shook too hard, a boot that felt cold at dawn. The city listened. The steppe listened. The Volga moved. In the tractor factory, the battle took on one of its strangest forms. The Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, once a place of machines for fields, had become a place where work and war overlapped until they could hardly be separated. There are accounts of tanks and machines leaving production under extreme conditions, of factory workers continuing while the front came near, of halls changing purpose faster than the mind could follow. For our story, we enter quietly. We enter a factory hall in autumn. The roof is damaged. Light enters through. Places light was never meant to enter. Dust hangs in the air. A machine stands half assembled. A workbench holds tools in a line. A metal cup rests beside a rag. A coat hangs on a hook. Somewhere beyond the wall, the city is not quiet. But here, for one short moment, the factory seems to remember itself. Nikolai Sokolov, the worker from the earlier part of the story, stands near a lathe with his hand on cold metal. He has not slept enough. No one has. The factory no longer has normal shifts. It has only need. Need for repairs, need for parts, need for movement, need for men and women who know machines. The machines are no longer only machines. They are tasks. They are survival. They are the next thing. A younger worker asks whether a part can still be used. Nikolai turns it in his hand, looks at the edge, runs his thumb along the surface. Maybe, he says. The younger worker waits. Nikolai says, maybe is not enough. He sets it aside, finds another piece, measures, checks, again. Outside, a lorry moves in the yard. Inside, someone coughs. A woman near the far wall ties a scarf tighter around her hair and goes back to sorting bolts. Her hands are black with grease. Her face is grey with dust. She hums one line of a song, then stops. Nothing unusual. The factory had always made sound. Now every sound feels borrowed. A hammer, a tool dropped, a cartwheel, a distant order, a machine starting, a machine stopping. The factory smelled of oil, steel, dust, smoke, burned insulation, wet cloth and black bread hidden in pockets. Nikolai thinks of his son. His son had asked once whether tractors were stronger than tanks. Nikolai had said tractors were more useful, which was not an answer a boy wanted. Now he wonders if he was right. The tractor factory becomes one of the anchors of the story. We will return to it, just as we return to the Volga, just as we return to the cellars. A place repeated becomes familiar enough for sleep. A factory hall with a broken roof, a workbench, a metal cup, a rag. A man measuring a part, warm enough, dark enough, useful enough, enough. Further south and west, Mamayev Kurgan rose above the city. A hill, a height, a place that gave a view and therefore became a place men could not ignore. In peacetime, a hill can be simple. Grass, paths, wind, children, couples, a view of the city. In war, a hill becomes a position, a number, a place to take, a place to hold, a place to lose, a place to take again. Mamayev Kurgan was fought over again and again, day after day, night after night. Its slopes were torn, its earth disturbed, its shape changed under the pressure of the battle. But tonight we do not climb it in drama. We stand at its edge in grey light. The wind moves over the hill, dust blows low, the Volga lies beyond, the city stretches broken below. A Soviet observer crouches near the remains of a wall and looks through binoculars. His name is Alexei. He is 19. He is too young to have the stillness expected of a watcher, but he is learning it. A watcher must not move quickly. A watcher must not imagine too much. A watcher must see what is there, not what fear invents. He has a notebook with damp pages. He writes numbers, times, shapes, movement, then waits. He waited. He listened. He breathed. He wrote. He waited again. The hill smells of dust, torn earth, smoke, wool, leather, and cold wind from the river. A man beside him sleeps for 4 minutes with his face against his sleeve. Alexei lets him. 4 minutes can be a kind of mercy. The untold story is made of such mercies. A man allowed to sleep, a cup shared, a name repeated correctly, a bandage kept dry, a letter folded into an inner pocket, a place beside a wall offered without speech. Not enough to change the battle, enough to keep a person human inside it. At Pavlov's house, the city became even smaller. A 4-story apartment building near the Volga became a strongpoint held by a small group of Soviet defenders for roughly 60 days. Later, the name would become famous. Pavlov's house. It would be described in military terms: defensive position. Field of fire, supply, observation, symbol. But first it was a building, a place where people had lived. Rooms with walls, windows, stairs, a cellar. Perhaps a kitchen table. Perhaps a child's mark on a doorframe. Perhaps wallpaper in one room. Perhaps a broken stove. In war, a house can become a fortress without ceasing to be a house. That is what makes it strange. Men inside Pavlov's house lived among the remains of ordinary rooms. They watched through broken windows. They carried ammunition. They rationed food. They listened. They moved carefully in darkness. They knew which floorboards creaked. They knew which corner held better shelter from wind. They knew where water collected. They knew which wall gave a view of the river. They knew the cellar smell: damp brick, candle smoke, stale breath, dust, gun oil, old plaster, wool, leather, and the sour edge of exhaustion. Imagine one night there, not the loudest night, a quieter one. The kind history rarely pauses to describe. A lamp is shielded behind a crate. A man writes a name in a notebook. Another eats a small piece of black bread. Another leans against the wall and sleeps with his head bowed. A sentry stands near a window wrapped in a coat. Outside, the ruined square lies dark. The Volga is somewhere behind them, not visible from every room, but felt. A river can be felt even when not seen. Its wind finds cracks. Its damp enters cloth. Its distance pulls at the mind. Inside the house, a man whispers that his feet are cold. Another tells him feet are always dramatic. A third says feet have reason to be. No one laughs loudly. The smile is enough. Warm enough. Dark enough. Quiet enough. Nothing unusual. In a room above, someone has scratched a line into the wall to count days. Perhaps this is not documented exactly, but men count days, on paper, on walls, in the mind, in cigarettes, in pieces of bread, in visits from runners, in how often the lamp oil is checked, in how long a silence lasts. The house becomes a clock, a house becomes a world, a house becomes a story large enough to survive the men inside it. You do not need to remember every detail of Pavlov's house, only the feeling. A building that had once held ordinary life, now holding tired men through long nights, a lamp low, a stairwell broken, a cellar damp, the Volga wind coming through cracks, 60 days, or close enough to become a legend. And inside those days, hundreds of small hours no monument can fully hold. Across the lines, German soldiers also lived in broken buildings. Matthias Keller spent one night in the remains of a shop. The shelves were mostly empty. A broken counter leaned at an angle. A torn piece of paper hung from a nail with no words he could read in the dim light. The room smelled of dust, old wood, tobacco, and damp uniforms. Ernst sat near the doorway, harmonica still in his pocket. Otto Brandt, the driver, had brought supplies forward and could not get back before darkness. He sat with the infantry for several hours, unhappy about this and more unhappy about his truck being elsewhere. He held a cup of something warm enough to be called soup if no one examined it closely. Matthias asked, "How is the truck?" Otto stared at him. Lonely, betrayed, probably leaking out of spite. Ernst smiled. "That is the first good news today." "No," Otto said. Good news would be a road. They all understood. In Stalingrad, roads were no longer roads in the old sense. They were gaps between danger. They were rubble channels. They were broken lines crossed at speed or not at all. The German supply men had learned that moving anything through the city cost time, fuel, nerves, and sometimes men. A simple delivery could become a story. A crate of rations, a box of medical supplies, a container of water, a bag of mail, a coil of wire, a radio battery. The city resisted movement. Dust resisted breathing. Cold resisted sleep. Fear resisted thought. Still, men moved. Because someone needed the crate. Someone needed the water. Someone needed the wire. Someone needed the letter. Even in the city labyrinth, the small things continued. A letter arrived for Matthias after weeks. Not from Lotta, from his mother. The envelope was creased and dirty. He read it by a low light in a corner of the ruined shop. She wrote about the garden too, about the priest's cough, about a neighbour's son, about rationing, about whether he needed socks. All mothers in war seem to ask about socks, as if socks could hold back history. Perhaps sometimes they do. A dry pair of socks can be a form of hope. Matthias folded the letter and placed it with the photograph. He did not show it to the others, not because it was private in the dramatic sense, because some tenderness cannot survive too much air. Outside, the ruined city settled into another night. The Volga wind moved through broken streets. In the Soviet cellar even checked Misha's photograph again. In Pavlov's house, a sentry shifted weight from one foot to the other. In the tractor factory, Nikolai slept for 20 minutes under a workbench because no one had told him not to. At Mamayev Kurgan, Alexei wrote a number, crossed it out, and wrote it again more clearly. At a German position, Otto muttered that no city should contain this many bricks. Nothing unusual. By October, Stalingrad had become a long present. That phrase matters. No one inside Stalingrad was living inside a neat sequence. They were not thinking, now we're in the famous phase, now we're in the central chapter, now history is watching. They were living inside the long present of cold rooms and slow hours, a present made of waiting, bursts of movement, more waiting, hunger, orders, dust, fear, exhaustion, tiny routines, the same wall, the same cup, the same man coughing, the same crack in the ceiling, the same river glimpsed through smoke, the same thought of home returning when least useful. The long present can make days disappear. A man may remember one morning clearly and lose the next 6. He remembers a spoon, a boot, a candle, a smell, a voice, but not the date. This is why we place a date gently. October 1942, Stalingrad, the German 6th Army pressing deeper, the Soviet 62nd Army holding near the Volga, the factories becoming battlefields. Mamayev Kurgan contested again and again. Pavlov's householding, the city turning to dust, then mud, then the first hints of frost, and then we return to the small room. Because sleep stories need rooms, a cellar room, a factory corner, a broken apartment, a watch post, a table with a lamp, somewhere for the mind to rest. In one cellar used as an aid station, a Soviet nurse named Galina moved quietly between men on blankets. She was 30. Before the war, she'd worked in a clinic. She'd once believed she disliked night duty. Now she understood night differently. Night could be terrible, but it could also soften the edges of faces. It could make a lamp seem kinder. It could give a person permission to speak softly. The aid station had low ceilings, pipes overhead, damp walls, a table made from a door set across boxes, a lamp shielded with cloth, a basin, bandages, a kettle, a stack of folded linen that never stayed folded long. Galina's hands were cracked from washing and cold. She kept a needle tucked into a bit of cloth. She kept a pencil behind her ear. She wrote names carefully, like Evelyn at Pearl Harbor, like Sam with his rosters, like anyone who understands that names are not cargo. A young soldier asked her if it was still October. She said yes. He asked which day. She told him. He nodded, then said, "I thought it was longer," she said. "It is long enough. Long enough." That became the answer. The night was long enough. The city was cold enough. The bread was hard enough. The cellar was dark enough. The lamp was bright enough. The body was tired enough. Enough. In the Red October steelworks, heat and cold lived strangely close. The great furnaces and industrial spaces that had shaped steel became part of the battle's geography. Broken walls, twisted beams, machine halls, storage yards, rail lines, workshops. A factory is confusing even when intact. When damaged, it becomes a maze of metal, shadow, echo, and danger. Men moved through it slowly. Every corner had to be learned, every passage checked. Every familiar industrial object could become strange in half-light. A crane hook, a steel beam, a pipe, a furnace door, a cart, a chain, a ladder, a bucket, a glove. Objects made for work became objects in war. Still, the memory of work clung to them. The smell of hot metal remained in places. Oil remained in cracks. Tools remained on benches. A worker's coat hung in a room no one had time to empty. A chalk mark remained on a board, half erased by dust. No readable words now, only traces. The untold story is often in traces. The thing left behind, the cup on the table, the boot under the bed, the lunch tin in the factory, the photograph in a pocket, the scarf hanging from a nail, the chalk line on a wall, the candle burned low, the river beyond the smoke. At the Barricadi factory, the same transformation occurred. Artillery workshops, machine spaces, storage areas, yards, rail spurs, offices, walls, trenches, holes and rooms became part of the urban labyrinth. The factory name meant barricades, and now the place itself became one. But even there, men still found moments of ordinary attention. A German soldier once found a child's toy in a corner of a damaged room, a small wooden horse. Perhaps it had belonged to a worker's child, perhaps to no one. He picked it up, looked at it, set it on a shelf. No one saw him do this. It changed nothing. It meant something anyway. A Soviet soldier in another part of the factory found a metal cup and cleaned it with snowmelt before the snow had fully come, using water collected from a pipe. He kept it. A cup that holds water becomes important quickly. A cup that can be warmed near a flame becomes almost intimate. The city became a world of such salvaged things: metal cups, blankets, lamps, boots, wire, cloth, nails, tins, paper, a spoon, a photograph, a pencil stub, a button, a city reduced and enlarged at the same time, reduced to survival, enlarged into history. You do not need to remember every factory. Let them become shapes. Tractor factory, Red October, Barricadi. 3 iron names along the Volga. 3 places where work became resistance and rooms became positions. 3 places where men waited in dust, smoke, oil, damp wool and cold light. 3 places the Volga wind reached in different ways. By late October the cold became more certain. Not yet the full winter, but no longer a hint. Morning came with frost in places. Metal felt harsher to the hand. Breath showed faintly in the air. Water became a problem before it became ice. Wet cloth became dangerous. Boots stiffened. Men slept closer, not out of comfort, but because warmth is practical. On the Soviet side, supplies crossed the Volga under difficult conditions. Boats moved at night or through danger. The river that had once carried ordinary cargo now carried men, ammunition, food, wounded, messages, hope, and fear. Boatmen became part of the battle's hidden bloodstream. A crossing could be short on a map and endless in the body. The Volga at night was wide and dark. Lights were hidden or dim. The banks were uncertain. The water smelled of mud, oil, smoke, cold, and distance. A boat moved low, engine muffled as much as possible. Men sat close together. No one spoke loudly. A crate shifted. Someone whispered. Someone coughed and tried to smother the sound. The river moved beneath them. Slow, dark, ancient. A soldier on such a boat might think of nothing. Or he might think of everything at once: the bank he left, the bank ahead, the letter in his coat, the bread in his pocket, his mother's hands, the cold, the sound of water against wood. He waited. He listened. He breathed. The boat crossed. Enough. Abram, the old boatman, made crossings like this until time lost its edges. He had known the river in all seasons, but now the Volga seemed older than ever. He spoke little. His helper, younger and more frightened, asked once whether the river cared who won. Abram said, "The river carries." The helper waited. Abram added, "That is not the same as caring." They said nothing more. Some truths are not useful twice. On the German side, supply became more difficult within the city. Movement through ruined streets drained strength. The long road behind them had not ended. It had narrowed into rubble. Otto Brandt's truck could not go where roads had ceased to be roads. He became a carrier of smaller things, parts, food, ammunition, messages. Once, mail. Mail changed men's faces. Even men too tired to speak would lift their heads when mail came. A letter could warm a room more than a stove for a few minutes. Otto brought a bundle of letters to a position in a broken school building. Men gathered without being ordered. Names were called, some answered, some did not. A letter for Ernst, one for Matthias. None for a man named Bauer, who said he had not expected one, then sat apart longer than usual. Matthias received a short note from Lotta. The plum tree had been harvested. She had saved jam. She wrote that he should hurry if he wanted any. He read that line 3 times. Hurry. The word belonged to a world with kitchens, not ruins. Jam, not rations. A tree, not a broken city. He folded the letter, placed it with the photograph. The pocket grew thick with home. Thin paper, heavy meaning. In Pavlov's house, the defenders also waited for supplies. Runners, small deliveries, water, food, ammunition, messages. A man could become known by the way he moved through danger with a canteen or a sack. We remember the big names, but every strong point depended on the unknown carriers. The person who brought water, the person who carried a message, the person who knew the safest path between ruins, the person who repaired a wire, the person who shared bread without speech. Pavlov's house held because men inside it endured, and because the city around it continued to breathe supplies toward it when it could. One night, Ivan Morozov passed through a cellar connected to a route near the house. He was not one of its famous defenders in our imagined thread, only a soldier moving through the same city. He saw a man asleep sitting upright with a canteen held against his chest. He saw a lamp flame bending in a draught. He saw a line of men waiting to move one at a time. He saw a woman wrapped in a coat carrying a bundle of cloth. He saw a child's shoe in a corner. He looked away from the shoe, not because it was terrible to see, because it was too ordinary, too close to home. Misha's photograph pressed against his chest. The route continued. He moved on. By November, the battle had worn both armies into new shapes. The German advance inside the city had taken much of Stalingrad, but not all. The Soviet defenders still held near the Volga. The 62nd Army remained in the city, compressed, battered, and stubborn. The city's industrial districts were fought over with a persistence that made each building seem larger than it was. The Volga crossings continued. The factories stood broken but not forgotten. Mamayev Kurgan remained a place of wind, earth, and repeated struggle. Pavlov's house still held within its own long story of rooms and days. And behind the wider Soviet lines, beyond the immediate city, another plan was forming. But the men in the cellars did not know the full shape of it. The men in ruined shops did not know. The women in aid stations did not know. The boatmen on the Volga did not know. They knew only that the cold was increasing. That food was short. That sleep came in fragments. That every day seemed both like yesterday and impossible to compare with it. They knew boots, bread, water, smoke, dust, wool, metal, names, letters. Enough. On the evening before the Great Change, the city looked almost still in places. This happens in war. A ruined street can seem peaceful for 1 minute. A wall catches sunset. Dust floats. No one moves. The mind tries to call it calm, but it is not calm. It is only a pause. In the tractor factory, Nikolai sat on an overturned crate and ate a piece of bread so hard it required patience. A woman beside him warmed her hands around an empty cup because the cup had been warm recently, and hope is sometimes based on memory. Someone said winter would come properly soon. Nikolai said it was already practicing. The woman nodded. Like a bad apprentice. He smiled. At Mamayev Kurgan, Alexei wrote in his notebook with fingers that had begun to stiffen. He blew on them, wrote again. The wind moved over the hill. The city below was broken and vast. The Volga beyond was darkening. At Pavlov's house, a sentry shifted at the window. The lamp behind him burned low. A man in the cellar whispered in his sleep. No one woke him. At a German position in the remains of the shop, Matthias read Lotta's line once more. You should hurry if you want any. He almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the word hurry had become absurd. No one in Stalingrad could hurry toward home. They could only wait inside the city's long present. Otto sat near the doorway, rubbing his hands together. Ernst held the harmonica but still did not play. Outside, the vulgar wind moved through broken streets. Inside, men were quiet enough, cold enough, tired enough, alive enough, nothing unusual. But this is the untold part of the story, not the famous version, the quieter one, the part before the encirclement was known by those inside it, the part where winter had not fully closed its hand, the part where men still believed roads might lead somewhere, the part where maps still looked possible, the part where letters still spoke of jam, socks, children, gardens and home. The next part will bring November 19th, 1942, Operation Uranus, the Soviet counteroffensive, the armies striking north and south of Stalingrad, the encirclement of the German Sixth Army, the steppe closing, the winter becoming a presence, the airlift that could not carry enough, the pockets of men in snow, the cellars growing colder, the long road east becoming a circle. But for now we remain for one more breath inside the city labyrinth. A cellar lamp, a factory bench, a broken stairwell, a watch post on Mamayev Kurgan, Pavlov's house in darkness, a German letter folded beside a photograph, a Soviet photograph warmed in an inner pocket, the Volga moving beyond all of it. The city is tired, the men are tired, the women are tired, the river is not tired, the steppe is not tired. Winter is not tired, it is only waiting. And Stalingrad, in the last weeks before snow and encirclement become the centre of the story, continues one small act at a time. A cup lifted, a name written, a blanket shared, a tool placed down, a boot tightened, a candle shielded, a letter folded, a breath taken, enough for 1 minute, then one more, then one more. The city breathes in dust and cold, the Volga breathes in darkness, and the long autumn of Stalingrad turns slowly toward winter. On the morning of November 19th, 1942, the steppe began to move, not the steppe itself. The steppe had always been still in its own immense way. Wide grass, frozen earth, low sky, wind travelling without walls to stop it. But beneath that sky, far to the north and south of Stalingrad, men, guns, horses, tanks, trucks, and orders began moving through the cold. The Soviet name was Operation Uranus. It was the counter-offensive that would close around the German Sixth Army. On a map it would later look clear. Two great arms moving inward, one from the north, one from the south, a meeting beyond the city, a circle forming, a pocket closing. But inside the hour itself nothing was so clean. There was fog, snow, frozen ground, engines struggling, men stamping their feet to keep warmth in them, horses breathing steam, guns pulled into place, commanders checking watches, radio operators listening through static, tank crews waiting in steel that seemed to hold the cold inside it. A soldier wrapping cloth around his hands because his gloves were not enough, a driver rubbing frost from a windshield, a man drinking tea too quickly and burning his tongue because heat had become too precious to waste. Winter had entered the story now, not as scenery, not as background, as a presence, slow, immense, patient. It came from the steppe, it came from the sky, it came through seams in coats and cracks in boots. It touched rifles, helmets, wagon wheels, truck engines, field telephones, bread, water, skin, paper and thought. It entered ruins and cellars, it entered sleeves, it entered sleep, it entered the spaces between words. The cold in Stalingrad would be remembered in numbers, -30, -40, numbers almost too clean. But the body does not feel numbers. The body feels a cup freezing at the rim, a boot that will not soften, a blanket that is never warm enough, a rifle bolt stiff under the hand, a breath that hurts the chest, a finger that no longer fully belongs to you, a candle flame trembling in a cellar, a letter too cold to unfold easily, a piece of bread like stone. Snow had begun to gather in the broken city. It fell on roofs that no longer had rooms beneath them. It fell through windows without glass. It gathered on stairways going nowhere. It lay along factory beams. It softened the edges of rubble. It covered shell holes, bricks, helmets, boards, rails, torn cloth, twisted metal and forgotten tools. Snow can make a ruined place look gentle from far away. That is one of its strange cruelties. It covers, it quiets, it softens, it does not heal. Inside the city, men continued to live in the long present. But something outside the city had changed. Operation Uranus struck the weaker Allied formations north and south of Stalingrad, and the Soviet forces moved around the flanks of the German army. The 6th Army under Friedrich Paulus, still fighting in the city, did not fully understand the shape of the danger at first. No army inside a battle sees the whole circle as it is being drawn. It feels rumours, gaps, reports, orders, delays, roads no longer open, units not where they were expected, supply columns failing to arrive, a message cut short, a map looked at too often, a staff officer becoming quiet, a driver sent one way and told to return by another, only to learn the other is closed. For Matthias Keller in the ruined shop near Stalingrad, the encirclement did not arrive as a grand announcement. It arrived as a change in faces. An officer passed with 2 men and did not answer a question. Otto Brandt returned later than expected without the supplies he'd gone to fetch. Ernst, who still carried the harmonica, said nothing for most of an afternoon. The usual rumours became less like rumours and more like weather. The road west, the road south, the Russians behind us. No, not behind, maybe north, maybe both. Wait for orders, hold, stay, stand fast. A man can hear many phrases and still not know the truth. Matthias sat in a broken room with frost along the inside of the wall. He held the letter from Lotta in his hands, the one about the plum jam. The paper was stiff. His fingertips were cracked. He read the same line again, "You should hurry if you want any." He did not smile now. The word hurry had become impossible. Outside, the city was white in places, not clean, only white. Snow lay over dust, dust lay under snow. The Volga was dark beneath ice and broken crossings. The wind came from the river and moved through the building as if the walls were suggestions. Otto entered the room, stamped his boots, and cursed the cold with no energy. Matthias looked up. "Road?" Otto shook his head. "Roads are now opinions." Ernst said, "That is not good." "No," Otto said, "but it is accurate." They said nothing else. In Stalingrad, accuracy had become more important than comfort. Comfort was often false. Accuracy might keep a man alive for another hour. On the Soviet side, inside a cellar near the riverbank, even Morozov first heard the news as a whisper, not the whole news, only pieces. Something to the north, something to the south, an advance, a closing, a change. Men passed it quietly because hope can be dangerous when spoken too loudly. Sergeant Petrov, the former schoolteacher, told them not to turn rumours into bread. Semyon asked what that meant. Petrov said, "It means rumours do not feed you." Semyon said, "Nothing feeds us." Petrov looked at him. "Then save your strength for accurate complaints." A few men smiled. Again, not much. Enough. In the cellar, the lamp burned low. A kettle sat near a small flame, not boiling, only thinking about it. The walls shone with damp. The men sat wrapped in coats, blankets, scarves, torn cloth, anything that could hold a little warmth. The cellar smelled of damp brick, candle smoke, gun oil, wet wool, black bread, frozen leather, stale breath, and snow carried in on boots. He even held the photograph of Misha inside his coat. He did not take it out. His hands were too cold, but he pressed the pocket once with his palm. Misha was there. Anya was there through the handwriting on the back. Home was there. Thin paper, large enough. Outside, the Volga moved under ice, as it always had, slow and dark and ancient. The river had become harder to cross. Ice floes moved, boats fought water and weather. Supplies came with difficulty. Men crossed in darkness. Wounded men crossed back when they could. The Volga carried more silence now. Less open water sound. More creek. More hidden movement. More cold. The river that had been a summer road was now a winter barrier and lifeline at once. For the defenders, it was behind them. For the city, it was breath. For the larger battle, it was a line no map could fully explain. A river is never only a line. It is water, ice, wind, memory, crossing, refusal, return. At the tractor factory, Nikolai Sokolov worked in a space where the cold and metal seemed to belong to each other. The factory hall had lost much of its former order, but pieces of order remained. A tool placed on a bench, a rag folded over a pipe, a metal cup near a small heat source, a list pinned to a board, corners curling, a woman sleeping for 10 minutes with her head on her arms, a boy carrying a message too large for his age. Nikolai's hands ached. He worked with gloves when he could, and without them when precision demanded it. Cold metal took warmth from skin with quiet greed. He had learned to touch quickly, hold briefly, let go, breathe into the fingers, again. A younger worker asked whether the encirclement meant the battle would end. Nikolai looked at him for a long moment. Men want endings. History offers changes. That is not our question, Nikolai said. What is? This part. He held up the piece of metal in his hand. The younger worker looked at it, then nodded. It was not wisdom in a grand sense, only factory truth. When the whole world is too large, work becomes one part. This bolt, this wire, this bandage, this cup, this line, this name, this breath. Enough. You do not need to follow every detail. You may drift in and out. Let the facts pass gently, like snow over rooftops. Operation Uranus, November 19th, 1942. Soviet armies striking the flanks. The German 6th Army inside Stalingrad. The circle closing. Winter entering the ruins. The Volga under cold wind. The steppe becoming white and immense. You do not need to hold the whole map. Only the feeling of a long road becoming a circle. Only the sound of snow against broken stone. Only the low lamp in a cellar. Only the hand around a tin cup. Only the quiet fact that the city was no longer merely attacked. It had become the centre of an encirclement. By November 23rd, the Soviet forces had linked up near Kalach, west of Stalingrad. The ring had closed. The German 6th Army and other units were trapped in what would become known as the Stalingrad Pocket. In German, the word Kessel was used, cauldron, a word too dramatic perhaps, but accurate in its own hard way. A contained place, a circle, a tightening. Inside the pocket, men still woke, ate if they could, waited, marched, froze, repaired, argued, wrote, and slept in fragments. A strategic catastrophe can feel to the men inside it like another cold morning, only with fewer choices. Matthias learned of the closure from an officer who spoke quickly and did not meet anyone's eyes for long. There would be orders, there would be supply, there would be airlift, there would be relief, hold, stand, wait. Words can keep men in place for a while. Sometimes words are necessary, sometimes they are blankets too thin for the weather. Otto Brandt listened from the doorway. After the officer left, he looked at his boots. "Air supply," he said. No one answered. Ernst asked, "You don't believe it?" Otto rubbed his hands. "I believe aircraft exist." "That is not the same." "No." He sat down heavily. The cold had entered his knees. The truck he had driven across the steppe was mostly useless now, trapped by fuel shortages, broken roads, and the shrinking world of the pocket. A driver without roads becomes a man with memories of movement. Otto hated that. He preferred motion, engines, wheels, a route. Even a bad road was a promise. Now the road had closed behind them. The long road east had become a circle of snow. The German leadership ordered the 6th Army to hold. Goering promised that the Luftwaffe could supply the surrounded forces by air. The numbers would not work. The weather would not work. The distances, airfields, aircraft, fuel, Soviet pressure, and the needs of tens of thousands of men would not bend to promises. But inside the pocket, men did not know all the numbers. They knew aircraft came sometimes. They knew not enough came. They knew supplies were short. They knew food diminished. They knew fuel became precious. They knew the cold grew worse. They knew horses were slaughtered and eaten one by one. At first, men said it quietly. Then it became ordinary. A horse that had pulled guns. A horse that had carried supplies. A horse that had stood in snow with steam rising from its body. Then meat, soup, a ration, a memory. War reduces the world in ways no one wants to name. Matthias saw a horse blanket folded beside a wall with no horse near it. The blanket was stiff with frost. He looked at it for too long. Ernst said, "Come inside." Matthias did. In the cellar, the soup that night tasted of almost nothing. Still, men held the bowls with both hands. Warm enough, thin enough, necessary enough. Nothing unusual. That phrase had become almost unbearable and still useful. Nothing unusual. Not because anything was normal, because the mind needed a place to stand. On the Soviet side, the sense of the battle changed too. The city was not free. Not yet. Fighting continued. The German forces still held parts of Stalingrad. The ruins still contained danger, hunger, fear, and close-range struggle. But somewhere beyond the immediate streets something had turned. Men in cellars heard it in the way officers spoke, in the way rumours returned with more weight, in the way Petrov stopped dismissing every whisper. Ivan asked once, "Is it true?" Petrov looked at the lamp, then at the men. It may be true enough. No one cheered. Not in that cellar. The cold was too real, the hunger too present, the city too close. Hope in Stalingrad did not come like music. It came like a second blanket. Still thin, still not enough, but held tightly. At Pavlov's house, the defenders endured into the winter. The building stood in its long story of broken rooms, damaged walls, stairwells, and cellar spaces. The 60 days associated with Pavlov's house became part of the legend, but inside those days, time was not legendary. It was practical. Check the post, watch the square, share the ration, carry water, sleep 1 hour, repair the wall, move quietly, listen, wait. A man inside the house wrapped cloth around his boots because the soles had begun to fail. Another used a piece of wire to fix a strap. Another wrote a few words on a scrap of paper and did not know where to send it. The Volga wind entered through broken windows. Snow drifted into corners. The house was cold enough, dark enough, held enough, enough. That word did not mean plenty. It meant not yet gone. At Mamayev Kurgan, the hill was white in patches. Snow gathered in hollows. The wind moved across the height without pity. Alexei, the young observer, had learned to keep the pencil inside his coat when not writing, so it would not become too stiff in the fingers. He wrote slowly now. His numbers were smaller, his pages brittle. A man beside him said he could no longer feel 2 toes. Alexei said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. He wrote the time, looked through the binoculars, lowered them, breathed into his scarf, waited. He waited. He listened. He breathed. He wrote. He waited again. The hill did not care who held it. The steppe did not care who froze. The Volga did not care who named it. This sounds cruel, but perhaps it is only the nature of earth and water. Human beings care. That is why they suffer. That is why they remember. By December, the Stalingrad pocket had become a world of shrinking resources. Food decreased, fuel decreased, medical supplies decreased, strength decreased, the cold increased. Snow entered everything. Airfields used by the Germans inside the pocket became lifelines, then failing lifelines. Aircraft came in when they could. They brought supplies. They carried wounded out when possible, but never enough, not nearly enough. The promise of full air supply became one more thing the cold stripped down to fact. A Ju-52 landing in snow might bring hope for a few minutes. Men would look toward the sound. Engines in the winter sky, a dark shape descending, a cargo unloaded quickly, a wounded man lifted, a mechanic shouting over wind, then the aircraft gone, the snow settling again, the silence returning, the hunger still there, the pocket still closed. At one improvised airfield, Otto Brandt helped unload crates because roads had failed him, and hands were still useful. He no longer complained about the truck. The truck was somewhere under snow and mechanical despair. A plane came in hard under grey light. Men moved toward it. The cold bit through gloves. Crates came down. Not enough. Always not enough. A wounded man asked whether the plane would take him out. No one answered at first. Then someone said, "Wait. Wait." The most common word in the pocket. Wait for orders. Wait for supplies. Wait for relief. Wait for the weather. Wait for the aircraft. Wait for morning. Wait for sleep. Wait for the cold to pass. The cold did not pass. It settled. It deepened. It became part of the body. If you are still awake, you do not need to hold every hardship. Let the facts pass gently. Let the snow cover the sharper edges. The airlift failed to supply enough. The pocket grew colder. The men grew weaker. The city remained broken. The Volga darkened under ice. The steppe became white. The winter became a room with no door. You may drift now, in and out, a cellar, a cup, a frozen road, a lamp, a coat, a horse blanket, a letter, a radio operator listening to silence, a plane engine fading into cloud. Enough. Inside Paulus's headquarters, the war took another form. Not the cold street, not the ruined factory, not the open steppe. A basement, a room beneath the city, maps, telephones, reports, messengers, cold walls, air too heavy, a lamp over a table, men moving carefully because exhaustion made everything fragile. Friedrich Paulus became the centre of decisions that were increasingly no longer his to make freely. Orders from above demanded holding. Requests were made, reports sent. The reality outside the room grew harsher. The pocket shrank, the army weakened, relief attempts failed. The most famous of these, Operation Winter Storm, attempted to break through from the southwest in December under Manstein's command. For men inside the pocket, the possibility of relief moved like a faint light. Some believed it, some doubted, some did both, depending on the hour. Hope can be seasonal. It can melt and freeze again. In the headquarters, a clerk named Weber copied reports with fingers stiff from cold. He was not important in the way history measures importance, but he saw paper come and go. He saw the language change. Strong verbs became cautious. Cautious verbs became urgent. Urgent verbs became thin. He kept a pencil behind his ear until he realized the ear was too cold. He kept it inside his coat instead. A telephone rang. A staff officer answered. Another map was marked. Someone asked for a figure. Someone else said the figure was already outdated. Weber wrote anyway. Paper in war often records things already changing. He thought of his wife in Leipzig. He thought of a table in their kitchen. He thought of a stove. He thought of bread soft enough to tear. Then he wrote another line. The headquarters smelled of damp wool, tobacco, paper, candle wax, stale air, and the faint chemical smell of maps and ink. In a corner, a cup of coffee substitute had gone cold. No one drank it. No one threw it away. Objects remained because people were too tired to decide their fate. Outside, the winter pressed against the city. In Soviet positions, cold ruled too. Victory was not warmth. Encirclement did not make a cellar comfortable. The men of the 62nd Army still endured hunger, cold, danger, exhaustion, and the shattered geography of the city. Even Morozov's boots had hardened. His hands cracked. He coughed more often. The photograph of Misha remained inside his coat. One night he finally unfolded it under the lamp. Semyon leaned over. "Your boy?" Ivan nodded. "Looks like a potato." Ivan looked at him. Semyon said, "A good potato." Petrov from across the cellar said, "That is not how one compliments a child." Semyon shrugged. "In this city, potato is high praise." Ivan laughed. A real laugh. Brief. Surprised. The photograph trembled in his hand. For a few seconds the cellar changed. Not much. Enough. A child somewhere far away became present in the room. Misha, who knew nothing of Stalingrad, warmed the men for a moment simply by existing on paper. Then Ivan folded the photograph and put it away. Warm enough. Dark enough. Human enough. Enough. By January 1943, the German pocket had been split and compressed. The end approached, though endings in war are rarely clean while they are happening. They arrive unevenly. One group receives an order, another receives nothing. One position collapses, another holds without knowing why. One man sleeps through a change, another walks all night. One headquarters moves, another cannot. The cold remains, the snow remains, hunger remains, the Volga remains. The Soviet forces pressed inward. The German soldiers inside the pocket, weakened by hunger and cold, could do less and less. The airfields were lost or unusable. The wounded could not be evacuated in the same way. The airlift dwindled. The promise became memory. In a cellar on the German side, Matthias Keller wrote one last letter to Lotta. He did not know whether it would travel. Probably not. Still, he wrote, "Dear Lotta, if this reaches you, tell Mother that I received her letter. Tell her the socks were good. That will matter to her." He paused. The pencil point broke. He sharpened it with a small knife, slowly, carefully, as if sharpening a pencil was still an ordinary task in an ordinary room. He continued, You wrote about the plum jam. I thought of it often. I don't know why the mind chooses such things. Perhaps because jam is impossible here, and therefore easy to imagine. He stopped again. What could he say? He did not want to write fear. He did not want to write cold. He did not want to write hunger. His sister already knew enough to worry. He wrote, "There is snow everywhere now. It makes the city quiet in places. Not peaceful, but quiet. I remember the garden. I remember the tree. I remember you laughing too close to the camera." He folded the paper. There was no envelope. He placed it beside the photograph. The pocket was full. Home had become a small archive under his coat. Ernst held the harmonica that night. He did not play. Then, much later, when most of the men were asleep or pretending to be, he lifted it and breathed one note. Only one. Soft, thin, barely music. No one told him to stop. No one asked for another. One note was enough. At Paulus's headquarters, the final days grew narrow. On January 30th, 1943, Paulus was promoted to Field Marshal by Hitler, a gesture loaded with expectations that Paulus did not fulfill. On January 31st, 1943, Friedrich Paulus surrendered in the southern pocket, in the basement of the Univermag department store in Stalingrad. The northern pocket would continue a little longer, surrendering by February 2nd. The exact rooms, dates, and names would enter history. But inside the moment, it was cold. It was exhaustion. It was men in a basement. It was papers, voices, a decision no longer avoidable, a war that had filled the city for months, changing its sound. In our story, we do not need to dramatize Paulus beyond the room. We see him in a basement, tired, shut in by history, surrounded by officers, reports, cold walls, and the end of a road that had begun in summer dust. The long road east had become a cellar. That is one way Stalingrad can be understood. A road becoming a cellar, a campaign becoming hunger, an army becoming names, a map becoming snow. When the surrender came, the guns did not all fall silent at once across every corner. But silence began to appear, patch by patch, street by street, cellar by cellar. A silence that was not peace yet, only the absence of the sound that had filled the city for 5 months. The guns went quiet. The wind moved across the broken city. Snow drifted into the empty windows. The river beneath the ice continued as it always had, slow and dark and ancient. German soldiers came out of cellars, basements, ruined buildings, factory spaces and trenches. They surrendered their weapons in the snow. Many could barely walk. Their coats hung loose. Their faces were hollowed by cold and hunger. They were no longer the columns of summer. No dust, no long road, no engines pushing east. Only men in winter coming out into white light. Soviet soldiers watched them, some silent, some too tired to feel what they expected to feel, some angry, some relieved, some simply cold. Victory inside a ruin does not always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like men standing in snow too exhausted to speak loudly. Ivan Morozov watched a column pass from a place near a broken wall. He held his rifle, but not tightly. The men moved slowly. German prisoners, thin, grey, wrapped in blankets, coats, cloth. A few looked at the ground. A few looked at nothing. One stumbled. Another helped him. Ivan thought of Misha, then of Matthias, though he did not know Matthias existed. He thought only of the strange fact that every man had once been a child held by someone. This thought came and went quickly. It was too large. He placed his hand over the pocket with the photograph. Petrov stood beside him. "The city is quiet," Semyon said. Petrov looked across the snow. "No," he said, "the city is listening." That was better. The city was listening to its own silence. At the factories, snow lay on machines. In the tractor factory, Nikolai walked through a hall that seemed larger without sound. The broken roof let in pale winter light. A tool lay where someone had left it. A metal cup sat frozen to a bench. The rag was stiff. The machine they had worked on weeks earlier stood unfinished. Nikolai touched the edge of the bench with one gloved hand. He did not know whether he was saying goodbye to something or greeting what remained. A younger worker came in behind him. Neither spoke. They stood together in the cold hall. Then Nikolai picked up the tool. Work would continue. Not the same work, but work. A city survives by beginning the next task even before it understands the last one. At Pavlov's house, the building remained, damaged. Famous now, though fame would come later. The men who had held it were changed by holding it. The cellar smelled the same. Damp brick, candle smoke, gun oil, wet wool, black bread, frozen leather, and exhaustion. But the silence outside had changed. The long pressure had lifted in one direction, not into ease, into aftermath. Someone in the house slept longer than usual. No one woke him. Sleep became possible in a different way. At Mamayev Kurgan, the wind crossed the hill. Snow lay over torn ground. Alexei, the young observer, closed his notebook. For once, there was less to write. Not nothing. Never nothing. But less. He looked down toward the Volga. The river under ice gave no sign of being impressed by human endurance. It had carried summer. It had carried autumn. It had carried winter. It would carry spring. That was its form of witness. The numbers after Stalingrad would be immense. Around 91,000 German soldiers went into captivity at the end. Only about 6,000 would return years later. The figure is so heavy that the mind cannot hold it as a single thing. 91,000, 6,000. Numbers can become walls, so we return to one man, one cup, one coat, one photograph, one folded letter, one pair of boots moving through snow. A column of prisoners crossed the white steppe. Men walked slowly, watched by Soviet guards who were themselves exhausted by months of battle. The prisoners moved through a world stripped of colour. Snow, sky, breath, coats, dark lines of men against white ground. Some carried blankets, some carried nothing. Some looked back once. Most did not. The steppe spread around them, the same steppe that had seemed endless in summer. Dry grass, dust, heat, engines. Now it was winter, white, silent, immense. The long road east had become the long road away. For Matthias Keller, if we let him live in this story long enough to enter that column, the world had become very small. Steppe, breath, steppe, breath, cold, snow, the photograph still in his pocket, the letter to Lotta still there, unsent. He did not know whether he would survive captivity. He did not know whether he would see Würzburg. He did not know whether the plum tree still stood. He knew only the next step, the man ahead of him, the cold inside his boots, the sky above the steppe. He waited, he walked, he breathed, enough for one step, then one more, then one more. Not every imagined life in this story needs an ending. Some fade into history the way many real lives did. Not because they did not matter, because the record could not hold them all. No one can carry the whole thing. You do not need to carry it either. Let the column move softly into distance. Let the steppe hold the silence. Let the snow cover the road. In Stalingrad, the city was ruined, but it was not gone. The Volga remained. The factories remained in broken form. The cellars remained. The tram lines were twisted, but the idea of trams remained. The gardens were torn, but the idea of spring remained. People emerged from shelters, basements, ruins, and workspaces. They looked at the city that had survived and not survived at once. They began counting, searching, clearing, repairing, finding water, finding bread, finding names, finding rooms, finding one another. The grandmother in the apartment near the river, if she had survived in our imagined thread, would cut bread again when bread came. Not because life was restored, because life begins again in the smallest tasks. The boy would not complain about the size of the slice for a while, then one day he would, and when he did, the grandmother might scold him, and that too would be survival. The girl would look at the Volga and perhaps no longer believe it belonged personally to her, or perhaps she would believe it even more. Children have their own ways of keeping the world. Nikolai would return to work, Galina would continue in cellars, then clinics, then whatever rooms could be made clean enough. Ivan would write to Anya if he could. Perhaps he would tell her he had seen snow inside rooms. Perhaps he would not. Perhaps he would write only, "I am alive." Misha's photograph travelled with me. That might be enough. The spring of 1943 would come eventually. Not quickly, not mercifully, but it would come. Snow would soften, ice would break on the Volga, water would move openly again, mud would return, then grass, then heat. The city would begin the long labour of reconstruction. People would rebuild walls, clear streets, Repair factories, restore power, bury the dead, count the missing, wait for letters, receive some, never receive others. The name Stalingrad would become one of the defining names of the war, a turning point, a symbol, a wound, a lesson, a monument. But tonight we return to the quiet version, the untold story, the rooms beneath the history, the cellars, the river, the factory bench, the black bread, the folded photograph, the tin cup, the boots hardened by frost, the lamp under a crate, the river wind in broken windows, the snow drifting into empty rooms, the men on both sides who are smaller than the event that held them. For you listening now, there is nothing more you need to follow. The siege has ended. The winter has ended. The long, slow story of Stalingrad rests now, beneath the snow of many decades. You do not need to hold the whole story. You can let it sink gently into the deep quiet of sleep. The city is far away now. The Volga is far away. The steppe is far away. The cellars, the factories, the hill, the house, the headquarters, the roads, the airfields, the prison columns, the frozen river, all far away, held by time, held by history, held by memory. You do not need to remember every date. You do not need to remember every name. You do not need to carry every number. Let them soften. Full Blau, June 1942, the long road east, the German 6th Army, Friedrich Paulus, the Soviet 62nd Army, Vasily Chukov, the tractor factory, Red October, Barricade, Mamayev Kurgan, Pavlov's house, Operation Uranus, November 19th, 1942, the encirclement, the winter, the airlift that could not carry enough, January 31st, 1943, Paulus in a basement, February 2nd, the final surrender, the numbers, the names, the snow. Let them pass like flakes across dark water, one by one. No need to hold them, no need to count them. The story has held them for you. The Volga still moves. In memory it is winter. The river is dark under ice. The city lies broken and quiet. Snow gathers along the factory walls. A tram rail disappears beneath white. A tin cup sits on a bench. A lamp burns low in a cellar. A photograph rests inside a coat. A folded letter waits without an address. A pair of boots stands near a doorway. A kettle cools. A blanket lies over a sleeping man. The wind crosses the steppe. Slow, wide, ancient. The factory fades. The cellar fades. The river fades. The name becomes soft at the edges. Stalingrad. A word in history, a city on the Volga. A story carried tonight, not with noise but with quiet. The factory fades. The broken roof becomes shadow. The metal bench becomes still. The tools stop waiting. The cup no longer needs to be lifted. The workers' hands rest. The factory fades. The cellar fades. The damp brick grows dark. The lamp flame lowers. The men inside it become only shapes beneath blankets. The smell of wool, candle smoke, black bread and cold stone softens. The cellar fades. The river fades. The Volga widens into darkness. The ice becomes smooth. The current below moves without sound. The bank disappears. The boats disappear. The wind over the river becomes a breath. The river fades. The hill fades. Mamayev Kurgan lies under snow. The notebook closes. The binoculars rest. The wind passes over the height. No one needs to watch now. The hill fades. The house fades. Pavlov's house becomes a dark outline against the winter sky. The broken windows soften. The stairwell grows quiet. The cellar below it rests. The house fades. The road fades. The long road east is covered by snow. Dust from summer is gone. The engines are silent. The letters are folded. The photograph is held. The road fades. The steppe remains only as whiteness, wide enough, quiet enough, still enough. The winter that once seemed endless becomes memory. The memory becomes softer. The softness becomes sleep. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Let the breath become quieter. Let the body become heavier. There is nowhere to go now. No road to march. No river to cross. No cellar to leave. No lamp to shield. No name to write. No detail to hold. Only breath. Only darkness. Only the quiet after a long story. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Let the shoulders loosen. Let the jaw unclench. Let the hands grow warm. Let the eyes rest. The story is finished for tonight. The Volga is quiet. The steppe is quiet. The factories are quiet. The cellars are quiet. The snow is falling without sound, again gently. The Volga is quiet. The steppe is quiet. The factories are quiet. The cellars are quiet. The snow is falling without sound. You do not need to follow anymore. You may let the words go. Let the factory fade. Let the cellar fade. Let the river fade. Let the name become soft at the edges. Stalingrad. A word in history. A city on the Volga. A story carried tonight, not with noise, but with quiet. Breathe in softly. Breathe out slowly. Let the breath become quieter. Let the body become heavier. The winter has ended. The siege has ended. The story rests beneath the snow of many decades, and you can rest now too. Quiet enough, dark enough, safe enough, enough.